have a special place in my heart because I really feel like it was my introduction into the trans community.
Hello, I am Kay Anderson, and you are listening to Lost Spaces, a podcast that mourns the death of queer nightlife. Every episode, I talk to a different person about a venue from their past, the memories they created there, and the people that they used to know. Gerard Reyes is a choreographer, dancer, teacher, video artist, somatic sex educator, intimacy coordinator, and Montreal's kiki ballroom scene pioneer. We caught up to talk about Montreal's Citibar, which, prior to its closing in 2014, served as a meeting point for T-girl sex workers and the men who loved them. The venue also served as the initial inspiration for Gerard's choreographed piece, The Principle of Pleasure.
Citibar was a place that I would go to in Montreal, north of the village, that was like my local bar, but it was also a trans bar, and for trans women. And I would go there with my then boyfriend, and oftentimes our friend Patsy. Mm-hmm. And it was a place that, it was a unique place in Montreal. It was the only trans bar that I knew of. And it had a clientele that was like trans female sex workers, mm-hmm. and straight men who liked the trans women. Yeah. And then not really, so it wasn't like your typical, it wasn't your typical straight bar, it wasn't your typical gay bar. It offered like it was for another clientele. And so that made it very unique in Montreal.
Mm. And so do you remember the first time you went?
Yeah. Well, it was my boyfriend who showed me this bar that I'd passed a million times and never made any point to go into, or really it was not on my map. So I was surprised that there was a bar, or that my boyfriend was inviting me to that bar, because it was so not on my radar. And then when we walked in, and it was in my neighborhood, my new neighborhood. And then when we walked in, it had a kind of atmosphere and community that like was so not common for Montreal, like really unique. And we would play, like we would speak with the bartender and kind of like make jokes with the bartender. Had that like back and forth kind of chit chat, but also like jokey chit chat. And
so like flirting or?
I don't know if flirting. I would say more just like joking, and like it's like very familiar kind of vibe.
Yeah.
Even if I'd never met that bartender before, so it was like very, it felt like a kind of, strangely, even though it was like very. It was new to me. It actually felt very familiar and very much like home, because there was a kind of even though we weren't their typical customers, like we walked in drag. That's what we did. We walked in drag, and the drag that we were doing was like dirty drag, is what we'd call it, meaning that like we weren't trying to actually pass as women. and we have like facial hair and body hair, and but we would do drag as a way of like making an otherwise boring night into a fun night.
Okay.
And so that would be like so it was also, it wasn't just how I was perceiving the bar when I walked in, it was also how we were perceived by the people in the bar, which was also not your common, your common person in the bar. Like we were both not the usual gender or not the usual sexuality and not dressed the usual way. So there was a kind of like, when you're in the zoo and you're observing animals, it's like we were kind of in that like sniffing each other out type of deal.
But despite that, you felt welcomed.
Yeah, definitely. Despite that.
And so you said before that the bar was not on your radar. And is that because you just didn't know it existed, or you dismissed it because you knew it was for trans women?
No, I didn't know it was for trans women. I just didn't know it existed.
Ah, okay.
And I think what happens often, people talk about the LGBTQI, two-spirited, etc. community, and it's not one community.
Yeah.
It's very clearly not one community. And so those like gender and sexuality divides really are very visible in the places that you go. So at that bar, it wasn't like so much for queer or gay or lesbian. It was for trans women and it was for straight men.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so then what's like the rest of the scene in Montreal like? Is it very segregated or is it kind of more fluid?
It's changed, actually. It's changed a lot since I first moved here. The first time, when I first came to Montreal for summer, it was like in 2002, around then. And then I moved here in 2006. And since 2006, I've been in and out. Like I've moved to New York, I moved to LA, I moved to Berlin. And so I've been back and forth. And back at the very beginning, like in 2002, the village was very gay male, very gay cis male, very white.
White, yeah.
And like almost every establishment, every venue, every bar, every club catered to that clientele. And then there was, I think, like one lesbian bar. I think no trans bars for trans women or trans men. And then there was one drag bar. And now, and then obviously there was also Citibar. I don't actually know when Citibar opened, but I didn't discover it until like 2011. So that's a lot of years actually of living in Montreal that I didn't know Citibar existed. And now I'd say the village had kind of crumbled. It has kind of crumbled. It's trying to resurge, but it doesn't really serve the same purpose as it did before. There was a time when I think gay men, maybe lesbian women were in a place of being the how should I say this? Where like if we talk about the full spectrum, where like because of AIDS and HIV, were stigmatized, highly stigmatized. I mean not just because of that, but that was one reason, I think, and also trans women, of course, and sex workers, etc. However, I just think like as a society, gay males have come to come to rise into like a lot of positions of power, have a lot of visibility now in television shows and movies, and and it's not they're not actually the people I think that need most protection, you know? And so I think the focus has changed, and also society has changed. So I think younger generations are not identifying necessarily, are much more fluid, gender and sexually fluid. And so it doesn't necessarily, it's not always like, you don't need to go like hang out just with your gay friends if you're gay male, you know, and that's where you feel safe. But you can have friends who are trans, you can have friends who are queer, who are non-binary, who are lesbian, who are straight. It's like, it's all good. I think that changes how people, and then of course there's online hookups and dating and all that.
So the scene's become a lot more mixed then over the years.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. And now I think also, like, people have been saying that like straight people are coming to like crash queer parties. So, I mean, is that crashing? Is it just like, we want to hang out because we like the way you party? Do you see what I mean?
So you don't feel like that's watering anything down if there's lots of straight people at a queer party?
Look, in general, I'd say I'm for the unification of the human race. And so I understand why there are divides. And while most of my friends are queer, I think of queer as more of a mindset than as of necessarily anything else. So like, if there are straight people, I think straight people should be welcome in queer spaces as long as they respect the queer people who are there. Yeah. And if they're planning to disrespect the queer people who are there, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, but it's not necessarily that they're planning to disrespect. It's that they don't kind of appreciate the privilege that they're bringing with them, and the and the way that can come across, I suppose. And I guess that's what people have problems with. But let's talk about Citibar. So what inspired you to create your show about the space?
I'd say, so when I say that my show was inspired by that space, I didn't try to recreate that space in my show. That it was really like, in French we say un élan, like a kind of like a launching pad that led me into discovering a lot of things that became the piece. So meeting a lot of trans women in that bar, and that was, I think, like, really, I feel like the beginning of me learning about trans people, actually. And then I went on from that, like, I went on to learn Vogue, to study Vogue in New York. And in the ballroom scene, especially in New York, Vogue and Vogue Femme, which is one of the styles of Vogue, was created by femme queens or trans women. And so, and then in the ballroom scene, there's also trans women sex workers, and, you know, not just trans women sex workers, other sex workers and with other genders. But so it was like a kind of an opening, I'd say, into a new community, into a new part of the human race, and learning about people who have another experience on Earth, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when you say you didn't like know anything about trans women, is that just like you just didn't have anyone in your life you didn't kind of fully engage with?
No, because again, like, you know, often I'd say, I mean, I don't know what the stats are in terms of like how many people identify as trans, like in a whole population, and I'm sure it differs from country to country. I don't think there are a lot of trans people if you like consider the entire population, right? And so unless I've probably met trans people before in my past, they didn't necessarily, maybe they just passed and I couldn't tell that they were trans, or, maybe, or they didn't tell me that they were trans, or it didn't come up in conversation. And so it wasn't something that I was thinking about actually very much.
Mm-hmm. And so how were you introduced to voguing?
So I lived in New York from 2004 to 2006. And in New York, some of my friends, like I would take, I'm a dancer, so I would take like different styles of dance classes. And one of the classes that I took was like hip hop, which was actually the first dance style that I learned, but informally, like not through taking classes. And then some of the people that I would take hip hop class with also vogued. And I remember like being out at a club after one of our classes, so going out with some of my friends, and then one of them started voguing. And I didn't know what the fuck that was, but I loved it. And I remember I said, like, what are you doing? And then he said, well, I'm voguing. And that, like, fast forward, that, like, totally, I just erased that memory from my brain. And then, like, fast forward to 2011, I think, or 2012. And my boyfriend, the same boyfriend that I would go to Citibar with, he was from New York. And I like would share some of videos of what I was doing in the studio, and so I started like working on a new piece, and that was the beginning of my choreographic career. And I'd show him a video, and then he'd say, I remember him telling me like, this is really good, and this is also makes me think of voguing. You know what voguing is? And I said, no, I don't know what it is. And so then we watched Paris is Burning, and I found out more about the scene. And I was touring in the United States, and I was in Pennsylvania, which was about like a 3-hour drive from New York, and I had a couple days off. So then I went into New York to take a class. Like I looked online and I found that there were classes, and then I went into New York to take a class. And like within the first 10 minutes, I was in love. Like it was a very clearly a passion, and it just like synced. It just like linked so many fragmented parts of who I am, as a dancer, as a queer male, as a Latino, as somebody who loves fashion, who loves posing, who loves all these things. So it just married all of that, and was like a space that I had never had before to perform kind of what's inside of me, as opposed to just think about and came to realize actually all the heteronormative rules that had been placed on me, even as a dancer. And as I also do contemporary dance. So let's say as a contemporary dancer, because contemporary dance often thinks of themselves, dancers or the dance like media thinks of itself as quite avant-garde and very like progressive, and it's not. It's just not.
And you saying that because like there are gender roles.
Yeah, it's very binary. Yeah. It's very binary. Because actually a lot of the choreographers. The choreographer I worked with most, Marie Chouinard, she is. I don't know how she would identify in terms of her sexuality, but she is cis female, and her work is actually quite binary. It's very male, female, and very archetypal. Like she allows the females in her company to more flexibility in how they behave on stage. So you can be like soft and sweet and tender as a female on stage, and you can also represent yourself as very like strong and strong and like muscular and like rough, and there's a more of a spectrum in the gender expression for females. But for men it was like, you're Adonis, you're like strong, you're here to lift women, you're here to be macho, so that was what I was living with, as like that was my job for 7 years before going to Citibar, before meeting this boyfriend, before like discovering how to play with gender and open up that conversation, and then learning about trans people and learning about ballroom and Vogue. It was like my world was like blown apart.
And so talk to me. So when there's different, is it different genres of dance, different subgenres? Is that what you call it, or like the different? Because there's different
Styles?
types of voguing styles. Yeah, okay, that's a better word. How many like different styles of voguing are there?
There's 3.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's a manageable number. So,
Yeah.
so can you and you specialize in ballroom kiki?
So I'm the pioneer of the kiki ballroom scene in Montreal. So quick like side note is that after I went to New York, and I trained with like some of the best voguers in the world, like Jose Extravaganza, who was on that Madonna tour way back when, Archie Burnett, who is the grandfather of the House of Ninja, the mother, Amazon Leomi Maldonado, who is the judge known as now probably most famously as the judge and voguer on some Nike commercials, but also on the legendary series that just came out.
Yeah.
And many other artists. And so then after that, I created the solo, but then I wanted to also teach. And so I got some of these teachers permission to teach Vogue back in Montreal, and then moved to Berlin where there was a scene and continued to teach there. And then when I moved back from Berlin to Montreal, that's when I started the scene here. But I had continued to teach also when I would come back intermittently between on trips back to Montreal. So your question was about
like what
the different styles of Vogue. So there's Old Way, New Way, and Vogue Femme.
Okay.
And in terms of the evolution of the styles, actually, it's not just that, like, bam, there were like 3 styles. It's not like the Big Bang. So there was first Old Way, which was the first way.
And how did it get that name?
It got that name afterwards.
Yeah.
So it was first performance. It was actually first spin and dip, or pop spin and dip. That's what it was called. And then became Old Way once New Way came around. Yeah, and then New Way was much more. So Old Way is very hieroglyphic, very martial arts inspired, very like so kind of 2-dimensional, kind of what you might gender as like more male or masculine. It included also like some freezes, so like b-boying freezes, because if you can think back to like imagine New York, the 70s, it like people on the street would be kind of mixing too, or like seeing each other, inspired by each other, or in the club seeing each other in styles and hip hop, and you know some things from hip hop come into voguing, right? And so there'd be some crossover, like things are not as pure as we think of them later on, right? And then New Way was that, but much more about balance, and had to do a lot. I think there were a lot more dancers, probably like trained dancers, that came into the scene to push Old Way into New Way. So it was more contortion-y, bendy, flexible, like balance and precision. Like that's what that, and faster. And the music also changed over time, right, in the scene. And then there was Vogue Femme, which was created by femme queens, or the trans women in the scene, who kind of changed the Old Way into a more feminine, like we'll say just feminine, in terms of typical genders. And so softening the lines, softening the quality, making it more about the illusion of like this like hourglass figure. So catwalk then becomes kind of what I don't subscribe to so much of these gender norms, but so I play with them. But I think of myself more as more fluid or gender non-conforming. So for me, it's like fun, but for some other people, it's who they are, you know, and it's about passing, and it's about belonging and feeling good and showing themselves in that way.
And so are you saying that because some people feel like more closely aligned to one style of dance?
Yes, absolutely. One of those styles of Vogue. Yeah, it's not so common that people do more than one.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Ah, that's interesting.
Because it's not just about a style of dance in the sense that like now it's becoming that, but that's not like if you go in, it has a purpose. It serves a purpose. You know, ballet is like a style, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's also, I don't know how many hundreds of years old, and very like linked to aristocracy and you know, palaces and monarchies and all that stuff. But now it's like a way that people train, and a way that people like a living, like a way for people to make a living. Whereas Vogue is so linked to like the queer, trans experience, gay, you know, that it's about expression. And it's about connecting fragmented parts. It's also, I'd say, like even it's about healing, because it's about connecting parts of ourselves that have been like stripped, that we've been stripped of, or that we haven't been allowed to express because of taboos and the way society is. So it comes from a very different place. I think why now people can be like cis het, you know, women or men who want to Vogue. It's rare that there's cis het men, but like cis het women for sure will come and Vogue and have fun, and also, you know, express parts of their sexuality or do it for exercise. And I mean that's what happens the world over with capitalism and with opening things up to outside, is that a lot of people are invited to the party now.
Yeah. But are you saying, like, in terms of some of the more established and older forms of dance, there's more of a kind of career path, for want of a better term, if someone is learning that. There's more of a kind of, this is what you can do when you're a practicing ballet dancer, but voguing is more about kind of your identity, and you would get involved in it because of expression rather than it's something that you learned from when you were a kid.
I'm sure there's 1,000,001 reasons why people get involved with voguing, so I won't say that it is one specific way. I can maybe just mostly speak for myself and what it means to me and why I do it, which is that for me, I wasn't doing it for the cool. I wasn't doing it to be trendy. I wasn't doing it for my career, even though it was part of that exploration, right? It came from a place of like real curiosity and a feeling that like this was deeply connected to like the core of me. Like it spoke to me. And like I said, you know, after 10 minutes of being in class with Benny Ninja, I was just sold. I was like, this shatters the idea of like self-criticism, and really opens up this idea of like self-love. And in my solo also, there are 2 mirrors, which are part of the set. And that mirror was present in Citibar, and that mirror was also present in my first Vogue class. And in my first Vogue class, we were asked to look into the mirror and use the mirror as a tool of empowerment rather than as a tool of criticism, which is how it's usually used in dance classes.
What, like you're not standing straight enough, or your leg isn't going high enough, that type of thing?
Yeah, and then it's also just ingrained. You don't even need the teacher to tell you that anymore, because it's actually just ingrained in the way that you look at yourself in a class, in a dance class in general. So it's kind of, it becomes the invisible voice in the room, you know?
Yeah.
And that was, we were actually taught to do the opposite of that in the Vogue class. We were told by the teacher, look at yourself and think about like all of the things that you love about yourself, and look at yourself and imagine like that you are perfect this way, that you don't have to change anything about yourself in order to feel that kind of feeling of grandeur and glamour and worth. You can just like tell yourself that and now start believing it.
And wait, and after 10 minutes you started believing it?
Yeah.
10 minutes, that's all it took.
I mean, that's, I'm also, you know, it wasn't the first time I like thought about myself in the world, and a lot of these things are part of practices that I have begun like since I was 17 or 16, and I had like a depression, and realized that the depression was actually a symptom of the environment I was in, and it had nothing to do with my worth. It had to do with other people making me feel like I was not worthy.
Yeah.
Like I was not sexy or fun, or I don't know, you know, any of those things that like a good person to be friends with or whatever, popular, interesting, you know what I mean? So back then, like that's when I started to become interested in meditation and Buddhism and all of that. So strangely, like a lot of people wouldn't necessarily link like Vogue to Buddhism, but I think there are like a lot of, at least the way I've learned it here in like the Western world. So maybe bastardized Buddhism is a better way to say it. A la carte Buddhism. But yeah, that was like work that I've been doing on myself since I was 16, 17, reflecting. So when I came into contact with voguing when I was like 35, 33, it was not my first time, not my first day at the rodeo.
But
we're on the radio, but that was the rodeo.
But it helped solidify some of those concepts in your head.
Yeah, of course. That's why I said like like fragmented pieces of me were like able to like come together, coalesce, and like bind and like reform. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm thinking I might need to like book a class.
Well, you're in London. There are classes. I know some people there.
And so back to Citibar. Do you remember hearing about it closing?
I did. It was a sad, sad day.
Why did it close?
I'm not so good with details. I'll just be honest about that. I think it had something to do with rent. I think it had something to do with like not having enough money to pay the rent, maybe. I know that like I knew the person who lived above Citibar, and that person was also like evicted.
Oh, okay.
So then they did like a rehaul of the whole building, and now it's like a gentrified bar.
Oh, boring.
Yeah. So I think it had to do with money.
Yeah.
I think it was just about like getting more money in there, getting a bar with a clientele that, would give them more money.
And did you get a chance to say goodbye?
Kind of, it's sort of like an informal way. So I'm also an ally of the sex work community, and I think it's the 17th of December is like Sex Workers' Rights Day. I'm not, I speak many different languages. That's not necessarily the right title. Like Sex Worker Appreciation Day, maybe. And so I joined some friends, some sex worker friends, and we had done a tour. We did a tour of like downtown Montreal, and we on our tour we stopped by Citibar, and we had a moment in front of Citibar to pay respects to the bar as a space that has served trans sex workers for many years. And so that for me was a moment of like reflection and gratitude towards Citibar and the inspiration that the people there gave me and the space they created for me and my partner and my boyfriend to also be ourselves and to have some fun.
Did you ever go to Citibar? Well, if you did, tell me all about it. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook with the username KAndersonMusic. Hit me up, share photos, tell me stories, let me have a bit more insight into that world. You can also find out more about Gerard at his website, Gerard X Reyes, REYES.com. Lost Spaces is not only a podcast, but a concept record as well. I've been writing songs about queer venues and the people who used to live their lives there, and will be releasing songs over the next year. You can hear the first single, which is called Well Grown Boys, and is also playing underneath my talking right this moment on all good streaming platforms. If you enjoyed this episode, I would really appreciate if you subscribed, left a review on Apple Podcasts, or just told other people who you think might be interested in listening to. I am Kay Anderson, and you have been listening to Lost Spaces.